that's why this was something that from the beginning the founders were really insistent on.
Right. And this was during a time period where
there was a lot of people who were like, yeah, like we'll use this, we'll wear a habit when we're like praying in a chapel. And it was like, well, that's not, I mean, we know you're like, like doing the God thing. You're in a chapel. It was like the world needs to see that out there on the street, and people. What
was it like for the Friars of the Renewal in the beginning, kind of reclaiming their tradition? Did they experience a lot of pushback?
Yeah, as all things, complicated history. But part of that, I think, was a desire for fidelity, which is here's the thing, like Franciscans are this like group that I think until the second coming are perennially going to be having this like desire for like a new, let's start this thing again, let's get after it again. And they talk about one of the reasons for this is unlike almost every other religious community that exists, the ideal, the rule, the sort of model for what it means to be a Franciscan is not
a piece of paper
in Constitution. It's a man
who was a holy fool in love with Jesus.
Yeah. But interestingly, he says at the end of his life to his brothers, he says, brothers, I've done what is mine. Now you do what is yours. So what is mine? What does it mean to be like radically faithful to living the gospel in the 21st century?
Right.
Like a lot of ways to answer that question. And because of that tension, right, is that I think there's this ongoing tension of like, I want to come back to what's authentic and true. Right. And so the friars began in a time where there was a lot of turmoil in religious life in general. Father Benedict Groeschel, who's one of our founders, sort of the main instigator of the renewal, was working with a lot of religious and a lot of priests and had a pulse on like the need for renewal in religious life in the church as part of the authentic renewal that was meant to flow out of the Second Vatican Council. And so the group has as its title, like Friars of the Renewal, not because primarily like involved with a charismatic renewal, but because at the center of what they sought to do was to seek to renew the church in the way Francis did, which is through a radical endeavor of this like conversion of my own heart. And allowing that conversion to be manifest in the way that we live our life, a shared common life that had as its anchor prayer, which flowed into a community that was real, not just in name, but like we really shared life as brothers. Like we wash dishes together, we cook for one another. It's like we clean different places in the fry. We live family, right? And to have that be a part of life was something desired. And this proximity to the poor was another.
And do you still have no beds?
There's no, yeah. So like it's either a simple mattress or a mat on the floor. So depending on the brother, it's like if you're
an old dude who can't walk, you might need a bit of a thicker mattress.
Yeah. And I mean, in some friars, it's like getting up and off a mattress on the floor isn't even an option because their age or health or whatever.
Right.
And so they've got a bed, but it's like the idea is a simplicity of life where it's like we want to push ourselves. And there's a phrase that's in our constitutions, which is we want to strive to live not by what is the maximum allowed, but the minimum necessary.
Yeah, that's good.
And so that's kind of like a paradigm.
It's like this culture of dispensation we have in the church.
Yeah.
Well, it's okay because it's like, well, what if I went the other way and yet at the same time not making an idol out of that, eh?
Yeah.
Because I'm sure that I could just see the Franciscans all trying to outdo each other.
Oh, yeah.
And that can be good, like outdoing each other in charity, but it can also be making an idol out of poverty. I don't know if you know this or not, but I was with Father Stan Fortuna in the Middle East.
Really?
Back in 2012, we went and spoke in Abu Dhabi together.
Awesome.
And I remember they said to us, do not mention the prophet, at these talks, not really the prophet, of course, but because there will be people from the government here, And I said, well, look, if I get martyred, I know it'll be Father Stan Fortuna and companion, and I'm not going down for companion. I'm sorry. Right. So no, we had a really good time together, and he got to tell me some of the history of your order. And so I'm not sure how much you know, but I mean, what was the response of the Capuchin order from which you came out?
Yeah.
I mean, that must have been mixed at best because it sounded like Benedict Groeschel and the others were like, no, the Lord's not calling us to renew where we are.
Yeah.
We have to go out.
Well, they tried within the Capuchin order during their time, and that was met with resistance. And so they eventually kind of came to an impasse. So the way they speak about it is, and this is what they've shared with us, is that none of them wanted to stop being Capuchins. They actually just wanted to live what they believed to be the authentic Capuchin way of life. And their provinces that they were in and the concrete situations they found themselves in was like, we can't do this here. And so they left, and there was two reactions, I think, and And I could see both of them as like ways that would be appropriate responses depending on your disposition towards them. One was, it was like kind of like a little bit of like good riddance, get the headache out of here, adios amigo /
good luck. We'll see how long you last.
Yeah, like a certain type of, a criticalness of their decision and looking down on it. And then there were others that were just like heartbroken because it was like a divorce. I mean, and even our own founders sort of look back at the founding and they're like a recognition this is a work of God, but also a sorrow and sadness, especially the older friars. I think some of the younger ones that had just kind of begun their life as Capuchins, it was less felt. But like Father Benedict Groeschel was like, several decades into being a Capuchin and he left that. And it just, to feel the weight of that, right? I think, so there was two different responses where it was like sorrow, frustration, feeling hurt on one side, and then another sort of like, like critical judgment, good riddance, peace later. And now we can get back to sort of living our life without the encumbrance of feeling like you're sitting here saying that this isn't our life.
That must have been like such a springtime for them,
living
together, praying, ministering.
Oh my goodness, yeah.
Like, how did they attain their first friary? Do you know?
Well, this was Father Benedict Groeschel was the sort of, not the spiritual director, but a spiritual friend and confidant of Cardinal O'Connor. And so when they decided to make this move, they knew they were going to need to be underneath church authority. It wasn't like we're just going to do a free-for-all and go start our own thing. And so he went to the Cardinal and said, we'd like to do this. Will you receive us? And Cardinal O'Connor says to him, I was wondering when you were going to finally come and ask this. It was sort of like, this further confirmation for Father Benedict. There's a funny story where he's there early on before kind of the official break, and a young brother's coming to him and just talking about his struggles with what's happening in the province and the community. And what does he say? He says, in response to like, what are we going to do, is what the young friar says to him. And his response was, we're going to do something. And he says, as soon as he said that, he knew the Holy Spirit had spoken through him. And that he also was realized it's kind of like, oh, crap, I can't believe I just said that. Now this is being set in motion. Like something just happened.
Yeah.
I've been wrestling and I just crossed a threshold.
So I don't know if you know the story or not, but I was sitting with Father Stan Fortuna over breakfast in Abu Dhabi before we went to preach. And he said that it may have been around this time when they're all wondering, like, what are we doing? That Father Benedict Groeschel called Father Stan, and Father Stan's like, hi. And Father Benedict said, the axe has been laid to the root. Something like that. And he's like, yeah, what does that mean? Something mystic. Do you know the same story?
Oh, yeah. Good. The axe has been laid to the tree, and Father Stan's just like, so what does that mean? What are we doing? He was like, pack your bags, kid. Come on over. We're doing the thing. Yeah, and that like they moved into the South Bronx in 1987. It was still Fort Apache. Every building around them was burned out, literally, not like figuratively. Cars that were burned out in the street. The police wouldn't go in there.
No way.
Like at all.
And y'all set up shop in a place the police wouldn't come if y'all had trouble.
And here they are. They move in and you just see like the miracle of God's providence again and again. This church that had been abandoned. It was originally St. Adalbert's. It was a Polish national church. Neighborhood had changed and there were no more Poles in the area, and the church itself was almost non-existent as a functioning parish. There was an old school building.
When is this? 80s, 90s?
87.
87. And how old Father Benedict roughly about that point?
At this point.
60s, 70s?
He's going to be late 60s.
I just love that someone in their late 60s is like, you know what? I think the Lord's calling me to go live in a burned out area where the police won't show up if we get into trouble.
And,
Would have been 54.
54. Holy cow. Wow. There you go, man.
What a man.
So, Father Benedict, the courage for him, there was a lot of people that risked things, but I just think about for him, like the way that he had so much that was already built. And you're right. Like, it's like, he's not this guy who's at the beginning looking forward. Because young people, like you say, we want to just like go start something new. And like you go to a college campus and say that, let's do something,
Yeah. And then also I think when you're that age, you begin to think of your legacy. And so the idea that you would trust the Lord to start this crazy adventure, having no idea whether it would succeed or not, going on faith.
Oh my goodness. I mean, he always said from the beginning, like this is a work of God.
Yeah.
He said just based on the fact that it survived. And he sort of jokingly says in the personalities, he was like that we didn't kill each other at the beginning.
Tell us about that. Tell us about the different personalities from what you know.
I mean, so you have Father, Stan Fortuna, who is just like a wild man.
Wild hippie.
Yeah,
no,
I mean,
hippie,
jazz.
I don't mean that in a bad way.
Yeah, it's like you're like a former jazz band musician who's like kind of this combination of like Puerto Rican, Italian, Yonkers boy who's like all soul, all heart, but fire, man. And then you have Father Benedict, so here's like choleric, melancholic Father. This is going to be Father Stan, I think, kind of more like choleric. Then you have over here Father Benedict, who like the guy, is like, I think, he was meant to be a CEO of some company, like just a vision, gifts, personality, but this tremendous heart for the poor that were like at the center of his life always. Like Jesus and the poor from the beginning just occupied him, and it was a place where his heart remained. And so like, and he's got the strong vision and a strong personality and ideas of what this should look like. Then you have Father Glenn, younger, a Brooklyn Italian guy who's, he's again got all of that sort of like, we work things out in our family by yelling at each other. It's like the opposite of the Irish passive aggressive thing, just sort of like, blah, it's out there. Father Andrew Apostle is probably the, sort of like the meekest of them, sort of the gentle lamb, but if he dug in, he dug in. Okay. And it was like, if he's convinced about something, and you got to think, what do you have to have inside of you to have the grit to think about doing what they did? What are the kind of personalities, right? And so all of those personalities now coming together and trying to hammer out, like, what exactly are we doing? And what is our life supposed to look like? And these first like chapters, and there's like, there's records of this stuff from like, that are in our, that we have access to as community. And like you read something, it's like, holy cow, they talk about like you come out and there be blood on the walls, like trying to wrestle together. I'm sorry,
blood on the walls, inside or outside?
Yeah, inside.
Whose blood?
Yeah, I mean, figuratively speaking.
Okay.
Not literally.
Okay, that's cool.
Yeah, okay, let's clarify that.
So
one.
at first I was like, you were talking about gang fights, blood on the outside walls. I'm like, you got friars getting into knife fights.
Yes, bro. It was, but there was like the wrestling to be able to try and together discern and know what does it look like to respond radically to the gospel and the Capuchin tradition now at this point in the history of the church. And these guys are all totally sold out and all in. And also now Bishop Bob Lombardo, another like just super capable individual with great capacity, vision, leadership. That's why he's a bishop, auxiliary bishop in Chicago, who's in the mix as well. Father Robert Stanyan, who was, I was telling you about him. He was a sort of a bi-ritual, Eastern and Latin Rite priest. He was a brother initially when the community started, became a priest later.
What was his name?
Father Robert Stanyan. And
how do I spell his last name?
S-T-A-N-I-O-N. Yeah. So Father Robert Stanyan.
Yeah.
And so you just have a cast of characters. There's this other guy, Joe Nolan, who was there. I'm trying to think. There was one more that Father Pio Mendato. Yeah. So Father Pio Mendato is the other one. So all of these guys, and each of them had sort of a different angle on like Franciscan life that was their emphasis. Father Benedict was like really always wanting to put it back to the poor and evangelization. So kind of the mission-oriented part. You had some of the brothers that were more emphasis was on like material poverty and simplicity. Others, it was like the fraternal dimension. Others, it were more like the contemplative eremitical part of the inheritance. And so each of them came with their sort of part of the life that was really important to them.
Yeah.
And then now we need to make a life out of this. So just, I mean, so it's the Holy Spirit, and this is Father Benedict, that's what he says. This is a work of God. Because it was so tenuous. I mean, they had no canonical status for the first year and a half. They were just basically, they weren't lay-asides, the priests weren't, but they were out of vows. They were men without a home. Yeah. They didn't have any official identity in the life of the church. They were just sort of under the shadow and the wing of Cardinal O'Connor to like exist and be here, but you don't actually exist as anything. And you just left the one thing that was your life and vocation, which was being a friar, a Capuchin.
They have their faculties, though, right?
They have faculties as priests.
Are they allowed to celebrate mass?
Yeah, they
for
were
the public?
But they were like like they had to surrender their habits. They had to, like, I mean, it was like a radical, and then they chose and discerned new habits, which is why we have the gray, the original color. I mean, that's not like a dig. It just sort of is. Go to Assisi and you'll see it. Francis's habits there.
It's not dyed.
Exactly. So it was the sign of like the poorest material that would be used by the poor, the destitute, would be undyed wool, which was like a grayish,
it's just so
color.
cool to wear something that makes sense to wear. It's like these Franciscan, no offense to these beautiful Franciscans that I meet who are wearing these things. You're like, this isn't made for life. You'll rip it. It's not warm enough. It's,
Yeah. Well, there's definitely some ripping and tearing that does happen, but that's where patches come in, And Francis, actually, I love this about him because we were talking about authenticity before and sort of like being real. And Francis would say, he's like, if I have a patch on the inside of my habit, I want to make sure there's one on the outside.
Why?
And he says, because I don't want people to be unaware that I have more padding inside to the cold.
Oh, I see.
That somehow that there would be something disingenuous that people know that like, so there was something about him. He was like this preoccupation with authenticity was part of his life. He was like, that's why when he got up to preach, sometimes he would literally like confess his sins. Because he says, I don't want you to think that I'm some great saint.
Hey, thank you so much for watching. Before you go, do us a favor, leave a comment, let us know what you thought of the video, like, and subscribe.